Hey guys, this is Grandmaster Anurag Mhamal and welcome to the first video on our channel, the Gawain Chess Trio. A few hours ago, I came across an interesting game between the strong English Grandmaster Gawain Jones and the prodigious young talent from India who is also the second youngest Grandmaster in the world, Gukesh D. Now we shall be having a closer look at the game and let's just jump straight into it. So the game began with e4, c5, knight f3, entering the Sicilian, knight c6, bishop b5, g6, and we are entering the Rossolimo variation in the Sicilian. Now this variation gained a lot of popularity because it was played quite often in the World Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana. Castle, bishop g7, rook e1, and e5. Now e5 was played in the game, but knight f6 is the main line, which is played more often, but e5 is gaining more popularity in recent times. White immediately played bishop to c6 before black gets knight e7 and supports the c6 knight because this spoils black's structure immediately. D into c6. Now this is definitely the more conventional way and was played in the game. Although b into c6 is also interesting because it tries to consolidate the center. It does come at the cost of development. Maybe it has some ideas of going with something like d6 and trying something like f5 later. D into c6, d3, and queen e7 was played in the game. Knight e7, although looks very natural, leads to, has a problem with the knight improving to a better square further. Like knight g6 and c6 squares are blocked, hence the knight will not be able to come to an active square like f4 or d4 later. Queen e7 is an interesting idea because it facilitates the plan of going with knight f6. The interesting trigonometric maneuver thematic to this position in Rossolimo, followed by knight d7, knight f8 and knight e6, and can further head to some good squares like f4 and d4. Knight f6 directly wouldn't be possible because knight into e5 and black would just simply lose a pawn. A4. Now a4 does gain some space on the queen side and also opens up this possibility of improving the knight via knight a3 and knight c4. Now you would think that knight d2 and knight c4 would also be good, but the problem is that it could interfere with the bishop's development and thus it is better to go with a4 and knight e3. Knight f6 and white played bishop g5, h6 and bishop e3, and now we can actually make sense of the move bishop g5. Bishop g5 actually tried to provoke h6, and what will happen after h6 bishop e3 is that the bishop is going to retreat, but this h6 move is going to be a potential weakness for black somewhere later on in the game, which could be exploited by white. Now black played this move c4. Now what black is trying to do is he's trying to get rid of his double pawns immediately. He's getting an opportunity to do it because d into c4 would be simply met with knight into e4. So he gets an opportunity, he's trying to do it, but the problem is that it's a little premature. Black should have definitely tried to castle first, continue with his development, got his pieces in the right places before continuing with something like c4. Now c4, we'll see how Gawain actually exploited this. He went with knight a3, which is a standard developing move, c into d3, c into d3, and black played bishop g4. Now again, castling was possible, but this would lead to an interesting variation because white has this possibility of playing queen c1, attacking the h6 pawn, which I mentioned earlier, would be a potential weakness to be exploited, and also has this double attack idea of playing bishop to c5 and winning the exchange on f8. Now, if black defends the pawn on h7, on h6 with king h7, bishop c5 would simply pick up the exchange. The interesting variation here, which I would like to show you, is black could play this move rook d8, bishop to h6, and bishop g4, good move. Now, this is a good move and this will lead to an interesting variation, but before we go into that, we will look at the most simple move rook into d3. Now, this picks up the pawn and neutralizes the material, but white has this variation bishop to g7, king to g7, and followed with knight c4, and black will have some difficulties dealing with defending the e5 pawn. Let's go back. Bishop g4 is the interesting try that we were talking about. Bishop to g7, king into g7, and since both f3 and d3 are under attack, white could defend it with something like rook e3, taking care of both the things. Black continues with this move knight h5, trying to improve his knight to a better square on f4, generating some compensation and counterplay ideas. Knight c4, f6. Now black is definitely indeed a pawn down here, but Since his knight can come to an active square and his pieces, his development is complete, his king is safe, he definitely we can say that he has some compensation and has some forthcoming ideas soon. And this was the variation I was talking about. Now it's difficult to get into this variation without knowing for sure. Hence, black did not play castle because it is not very clear still. Black continued. Let's go back a few moves and let's see what happened in the game. Black continued with bishop g4. Now, bishop g4 is a normal stand developing move. It also opens up the possibility of maybe playing something like knight d7 without hindering the development of the bishop and then getting ready to castle. This was maybe Gukesh's idea in the position, but white took like suppose white plays knight c4, black can play knight d7 and defend the pawn, and then he's ready to castle. But white played this move, rook c1. Gavin had some ideas of his own. Now this prevents the castling immediately because white can meet it with something like bishop c5. Like castling would be simply met with bishop c5, picking up the exchange. So black further defended this with knight d7. A very natural response, preventing bishop c5, and again, once again, getting ready to castle. Again, once again, giving time this good move, queen b3. Now this is targeting the b7 pawn, but it just does let black to capture on f3. It is completely ignoring the possibility that black can definitely double white's pawns on f3 and spoil his spawn this pawn structure there. Like bishop to f3, g into f3 does spoil his pawn structure, give him double pawns, and does weaken his king slightly. But the point here is that black doesn't have enough pieces to exploit this king's positioning, and the double pawns can be gotten rid of with something like f4 maybe soon, and it is black who has more things to worry about because b7 is falling and his king is stuck still in the center. So black did continue with bishop f3, white just picked up g into f3, and black played knight f8. Now this is a natural response to defend the b7 pawn, and if you go to see, there is no good way for black to actually prevent the pawn because something like rook b8 is simply met with bishop into a7. Same goes for castle. If black tries to castle on the queen side, defending the pawn and getting rid of his king safety, he's still coming under the line of the rook, and white can simply pick up the a7 pawn too, and that wouldn't be good for black altogether. So black played knight f8, and maybe he has an idea of bringing his knight to e6, further facilitating castling. But the problem is that after knight f8, white gets this move bishop c5, exploiting the queen's positioning on e7, and now the king is stuck in the center, and the position is going to be soon falling apart. Let's take a look how it went. Queen d7, and white played knight c4. Now there's a simple idea of heading to d6, and exploiting this king's positioning. Once the knight comes to d6, it will be difficult for black to actually get his king to safety either ways. Knight e6, followed with knight d6, and black played king e7. Now this is an interesting try, but the safer alternative would be to play something like king f8. King f8 would be met with, let's say, something like queen into b7, queen into b7, knight into b7. Now if black takes knight into c5, and white is just a simple healthy pawn up, and the c6 pawn is also a potential target. If black plays something like king g8, white can just retreat his bishop back on e3. Again, once again, a simple pawn up, and the c6 pawn also may soon be falling. Let's go back. Black tried this move king e7, which is an interesting approach. Maybe keeping the theme in mind that anyways black's position is worse, and maybe creating some complications on the board would give him some ideas for compensation. White just simply picked up the pawn on b7. Now there are different alternative discovered checks that white could go with, like knight c8, knight f5, knight into f7 wouldn't be possible because king at f7 would simply lose us the piece. But knight f5 and knight c8 wouldn't really do much because knight c8, black can just escape with his king back to e8. King f6 is something that we should look at because it's a big blunder here because bishop e7, and white would simply pick up black's queen. Same goes for knight f5. If black comes with the king to f6, bishop e7 would simply pick up the king, but black would simply go with king d8 here, and once again knight into g7, knight into g7, and black is doing okay here. So knight into b7 was played in the game. Black went with king f6, and now Gavin went with something interesting. But before we go with that, before we take a closer look at that, white could have simply played something simple like knight a5, retreating the knight and maintaining the simple extra pawn, which would have been a simple way to continue. Although Gavin had some other ideas, he entered a much more decisive and interesting variation which was definitely supplemented by his precise calculations. So the interesting move that white played in this position was d4. Now d4 is a very strong move because it's trying to exploit this king's positioning on f6 pretty much immediately. Let's look at what the different variations possible are in this position. Now, e into d4 was played in the game, but before we go into e into d4, let's look at knight into d4. Knight into d4 would be met with bishop into d4. If black takes queen into d4, rook into c6, king e7 is met with rook c7, and black's position will collapse because f7 is falling. Same goes for king g5, queen into f7, and once again, black will soon be mated here. On the other hand, e into d4 is met with e5 check. Let's say king comes to g5. Then once again, there's possibility of f4 check, king into f4, queen g3 check, king f5, and queen h3 check, and white can simply pick up the queen. So this would also be winning king if it tries to go further to h5. Then white has this interesting move e6, cutting off the queen's idea to come to g4. Black captures on e6 and simply met with something like queen h3, which delivers a mate. Queen f3 would be a terrible mistake because black could get queen g4 and still keep fighting on and prolong the game. Let's go back here. So the move that black played in the game was into d4, but before that I'd like to show an interesting idea that black could try to prolong the game a little bit with something like g5. Now this is not an easy move to see, but it's trying to open up an escape route for the king on g6. Let's say d into e5 would be met with king g6, and black is trying to escape with this king, but this would only prolong the game because black is 2 pawns down at the moment. So let's say white plays something as simple as bishop d6, preventing rook b8, and further let's say gets the knight back to c5. He would simply be winning because he's 2 pawns up at the moment. So black's position would eventually collapse. Maybe prolong the game a little bit, but eventually it would lead to a collapse. E into d4 was played in the game. This was met with e5 check. The king went to g5, and again a good move by Gawain f4. Now a thematic idea opening up, and this opens up the idea of getting the queen to g3, and it makes it very simple, like for white to actually checkmate black pretty much soon here. So king into f4, let's say, would be met with queen g3, king f5, and knight d6, and white would just pick up the queen. If we go back, knight into f4 was actually played in the game. Now e6, another good move here, and this shows the precise calculation Gawain had. e6 is very important here because if white starts with queen g3 directly, it could be met with queen g4, interfering with the mating ideas that white had. Did not have any ideas to prolong the game, so he definitely went with e6, which is very precise here because f into e6 now would be simply met with queen g3, king comes to f5, and knight d6, and black would just lose their f4 knight, and the game would soon collapse. Again, knight into e6 was played in the game here, which was met with queen g3 check, king went to h5, and queen f3 check, and black played the king to g5. Now if the king had come to h4, white would just finish the game with rook e4 check, king g5, and h4 would deliver an immediate mate. And if knight f4, then queen into f4 followed by queen h4 would deliver a simple mate here. So black played king g5, and white played this move h4 check, which tries to force and replicate the same variation we just saw with king h4, and black just resigned in this position because this will lead to a mate pretty much soon. King into h4 would be met with rook e4 check, king g5, rook g4 check, king h5, and queen h3 would deliver a mate. So we saw an interesting game here which highlights the precise calculation of Gawain in this game. Now we'll be coming up with such more instructive videos, so if you did enjoy this videos, please hit a like, subscribe to our channel, and keep updated with the upcoming videos we have for you. See you next time. Yeah?